Guten Abend. I'm very honored to be here. And first of all, I would like to thank the institution who is hosting me, and especially Margit and Iris, who have been very kind and with this invitation. Also, I would like to say hello to my mates of the office that I'm having here, and we are seeing each other every day, and it's been very kind. The objective of this talk is to present to you the project Visual Trust, which I am directing as PI together with a team of researchers. This is a 5-year project funded by the European Commission. Yet how to present this project? So instead of starting with a list of objectives, methodology, research questions, results, I would propose you to start with a small tour. First, to stop Puerto Rico, where I have been doing fieldwork for the last 15 years. So in the east of the island of Puerto Rico, there is this big river called Rio Grande. And if you cross the river, you arrive to a village which is called Loíza. Loíza is the village where African enslaved people during the colonial period used to go to escape from slavery. Still today, Loíza is the center of Afro-descendant people. It is called the most African place of Puerto Rico. In Loíza, there are a lot of festivals, ceremonies, and rituals celebrating the African past, a lot of political engagement. I'm actually making a film about these figures, these fascinating figures. So it's a locus of political pro-African engagement. And here they worship a saint, this saint. In Spanish, it's called Santiago Matamoros, which can be translated as Saint James the Moor Slayer, right? So they adore this saint, they worship the saint, they talk to the saint. But what does this saint depict? Well, it depicts the image of a white knight holding a sword, and below the white horse there is the head of a Muslim, let's say African person, right? Decapitated, bleeding, and they always repeat the same sentence. Okay, Roger, one thing is what the image shows, and another thing is what the image means. And the second thing, we trust this image. Confiamos mucho en la imagen, in Spanish. So this is what I found on my fieldwork. Now, let's move to the Netherlands. Let's go to the European Space Agency, where we have been doing fieldwork also during the last 3 years. Here, astronomers, the most well-renowned astronomers of the world, look at the sky, make images of the sky, and thanks to these images, they can imagine, for example, what is going to happen with the Milky Way when it will encounter the Andromeda Galaxy. And for example, I saw this beautiful image. And it was in front of the person who made this image. And I said, what a nice image. And he said, you will probably trust this image, Roger. But to be frank, this image does not exist. This image does not exist. What does it mean exactly? Okay, third stop, Barcelona. I had to put it, sorry. In Barcelona, we have a fact-checking agency called Verificat. Look at the subtitle, Tornem als fets, which means let's go back to the facts. Yet, what does it mean to verify or to check a fact? What is a fact after all? Latour has a lot of books about what is a fact, right? So, fact-checking agency try to assess information in order to get reliable accounts of the world. It includes images as well. They assess images, since images, especially photographs, were considered a proof, an evidence, a word coming from the verb videre, which means that can be seen, right? But this is no longer the case. So Verificat does this intense job of image assessment, And it allows them to, for example, announce information like this one. Look at the translation below. Grok spreads disinformation about the destruction of a school in Iran. The images are not from Afghanistan, as the AI claims. It is very recent, right? And they would accompany the announcement with this photograph that has these red squares. I will talk this a little bit later because I call it the aesthetics of image assessment. We are increasingly surrounded by these squares and arrows and circles, spotting specific places of images, right? And so they do this. I will show you now a small fragment of a person from this agency Verificat. This is a sequence of the film we are making, in which she talks about what they do.
Wait. 3, 2, 1. False information is not something new. It's older than the internet and, of course, older than artificial intelligence. These two things, however, have changed the way we read information and how we relate to it. What can citizens do to combat the spread of false information? You have to consider that this information is designed to not only catch, but keep your attention and make you react. Before you move on to engage with the publication, ask yourself, is it engaging with reactive emotions such as anger or fear? Artificial intelligence can be used to generate text on demand to affect readers in a certain way. So, what should we believe? Are we supposed to doubt everything we read and see online? Absolutely not. There is a balance between blind trust and cynical distrust.
There is a balance between blind trust and cynical distrust. If it was so easy, right? So, sorry. What have all these cases in common? I mean, fact-checking agency, Santiago Matamoros, and the European Space Agency. All these examples have in common the fact that they are instances, or they present instances of what I call visual trust, or the other way around, visual mistrust. What is visual trust? Well, visual trust can be defined as follows. To trust an image means considering it as a reliable and accountable visual medium for knowing the world, communicating to others, and intervening in reality. Visual trust also means relying on what our eyes can see, either by their own meanings or with the help of any kind of artifact. So the concept of visual trust, can we trust what we see? The images with whom we interact, or even what our eyes can see, is the main focus of this ERC project, which, I repeat, is not only me, it's a project involving a team of 5 researchers to whom I want to say thanks. So, visual trust is part of our day-to-day life. I mean, think about mirages, right? Mirages are part of what we call perceptual visual trust or mistrust. Sometimes we doubt, even when we see faces, we see, do I know her or not? This is a moment of visual hesitation, right? Visual trust and visual mistrust is part of the cultural history of Occident as well. Think on the famous episode of the Golden Calf as an example of visual mistrust, what images can do us harm. And the history of photography is also a history of visual trust and mistrust, right? Photography, the 20th century is the century of photography, and our eye is a photographic one. And the way we understand visual trust, also image assessment, is very photographic. However, even if it's something that has been always with us, the idea of visual trust and the topic of visual trust, it is undeniable that today the rise of AI-generated images, especially those imitating photorealistic aesthetics, has put the notion of visual trust to the fore. Do you remember this episode? This photograph won a prize in a documentary photography festival. And then he said, oh no, it was made through artificial intelligence. And he gave the prize back. And if we look at the images, we say, of course, it's artificial intelligence. And it's not that all. It's because our eye has been trained, and now we can spot better than just some years ago the new visual grammar of artificial intelligence. The fact is that the emergence of these images imitating photorealistic photography, especially in journalism, has created a kind of visual panic, right? As if the shadow of falsity was lurking everywhere in a world where we could not distinguish between original and copies. And this creates a kind of fear, the fear of being surrounded by images who resemble too much to what they depict. You know this website, right? People that do not exist is being very famous, right? So all this is being very studied nowadays. And there are different projects about the fake, about artificial intelligence, but I was uncomfortable with most of these projects as an anthropologist. And why? For two reasons. First of all, because most of them were poorly rooted in people's lives and experiences, and they lacked of cultural perspective. It's fine to think about what is fake, what is original, what is authentic. But I'm an anthropologist. I wanted to talk to people and ask them, what is for you a reliable image and a false one? How do you assess visual accuracy? And what is a deceptive image for you? Thus, for example, someone from India, Puerto Rico, Brazil, Guinea-Bissau in Africa, have similar ideas of what authenticity and visual authenticity in particular is. We needed ethnographic fieldwork about visual trust. And then there is a second important aspect, is the oversizing of mistrust. It's fine. We know that fake is everywhere. We know that we mistrust images. But we can't live in a world of falsity. Every day we trust images. I mean, if we get an image of a friend through WhatsApp saying, okay, this is what's going to happen, come along, and we go, it's because we trust this image. When you're just browsing on the internet, you distinguish between reliable images and misleading ones, but you do it in a very intuitive way. But most of the time, we live with and through images, we trust them. And then the idea was, okay, let's do that. Let's study visual trust, adopting a relational, comparative, and contextual approach. And what does it mean? So the idea was simply to put the focus in analyzing through fieldwork, that is, through being with people, spending time with them, what people do with images, how people communicate through images, how images are connected with imagination, how they are connected with desire, how images have a performative power affecting the world, and how they shape future and the politics of anticipation, and how all this is connected to trust. So in order to do this, the project was designed according to three main images. And this is one of the good things of these ERC projects, and this is one of the reasons why I'm here as well, is because they prompt you to bring together different research fields. I mean, if you just say, no, I'm just going to work on religion, I'm just going to work on medical images, it won't work. But if you say, let's bring together science, religion, society, documentary photography, astronomy, and let's see. Because in our day-to-day life, we pass from one kind of image to another. They form part of the same visual system. The way we conceive one of these images highly influences the way we approach the others. So, for example, some astronomical images acquire a quasi-religious value. Wow, the first photo of a black hole, right? It's almost a worshipping. And on the other way around, a religious shrine can be, for them, a sort of scientific infrastructure as well, because it gives accounts of the world. So we wanted to bring all this together, and so the project combined a researcher working on documentary photography, another researcher working on the role of fake images in electoral processes where extreme right is involved. Sadly, we had a lot of instances. The research in Puerto Rico, where I'm going in a couple of months to finish this research on Santiago Matamoros. Someone also working on guruship in India, working on the case of Sai Baba, astronomical images, and the aesthetics of the sublime. And finally, a researcher is working on medical images and the trust in medical images. And there is a very nice example because in the public hospital of Barcelona, they do this MRI, and from time to time, they see MRIs which are not clear, and then they gather, they screen, and they comment on them to see if they are trustable or not trustable. And here you can see even the grammar, the words that they use to assess the reliability of images, right? Okay, all this is fine, but what about the method? How to do this? But here comes another thing that we try to put in practice, and then I will show you some conclusions and examples, which is this principle of studying images through images. I was uncomfortable. I mean, I read a lot of, I like writing, I write books, but there is a lot of books about images that contain no images at all. And there are a lot of books about the anthropology of the body, no bodies, right? Color is very important in social life, black and white. And said, okay, let's try to study by using audiovisual means and writing visually, making films, photo essays or whatever, what people do with images. I mean, anthropology is about social relationships. Anthropology is about how people interact with each other and give meaning to the world in which they live. And we study this by creating relationship with people as well, by living, staying with them. So let's do this by using audiovisual means. And so the idea was to use cinema as research. I love making films. And all members of the research team had a background in cinema. So some films are being done. One of the main objectives of my stay here in Karlsruhe is to make the structure of the final film. I have one week left. And so these are some of the films that we have been making along the process and that I will be showing to you. But also it includes, workshops in hospitals or with adolescents, photo elicitation and video elicitation, which means showing images to people and then making them comment on these images, using 360 degrees. This was a very interesting experiment, which is also published, that we filmed a ritual using 360 cameras, and then we invited the persons who performed the ritual to experience the ritual in 360, and then to explain whether they trusted the experience or not, whether this idea of being there was literal or not. The response was no. But it was very interesting. Or the using of artificial intelligence and smartphones together with other academic results, as for example, articles, books, or an exhibition that I created in Barcelona about anthropological museums and the trust in anthropological museums. So the idea is more or less to have this idea of research as an eclectic assemblage, right? Instead of conceiving research as, okay, I'm going to make just one thing, to have visual essays and films and different experiences that create a sort of constellation of outcomes that connect to each other. Okay, so what about the conclusions? What's the result of all this, right? Well, of course, this is an ongoing process, and a lot could be said about this, but I will just very briefly describe 3 potential directions or ideas. The first one is evident. Visual trust is a cultural and socially relative concept, which means that what is trustworthy for one cannot be trustworthy for others, which means that we need fieldwork. We need to anchor our statements into specific cultural contexts and taking into account, what we call in anthropology, emic point of view, that is the point of view of the other. Anthropology is about this idea of identity and alterity, of getting a problem from the other's point of view, right? An important thing is that the fake is not a property of the image itself. That's an important and interesting thing as well, right? The fake, what makes an image fake is not, we're very influenced by what is called the representationalist approach to images, right? According to which images are defined through the relationship that they maintain with what they depict. But there are a lot of different ways of assessing the trustworthiness of images. Remember, I don't have it here, or perhaps yes, these, for example, there are different ways of understanding what a trustworthy image is. I will show you some examples afterwards. And so we have to take into account that it's not, have to go beyond the frame when studying anthropology of images. An anthropology of images is not an anthropology of images as abstract science, but an anthropology of the relationships that are created to images, of considering images as social agents, and the discourses, the iconic paths of images as we define, right? Are you following me? So, for example, this image was taken at the Paris Photo, the last Paris Photo. And so here you have the image, and then you have a group of people talking about the image. Giving layers of significance to the images, determining the iconic path that the image will take, and therefore the ways, or shaping the ways it will be conceived and interpreted by different people. The same goes for this image. This image can be considered a very, objective images, but actually it is not, in the sense that it is a simulation, but it is a simulation that in some sense can spark people's imagination, and sparking people's imagination can become, can prompt people to do things, thus acquiring a performative sense, right? And of course, all this applies to our own images as filmmakers. This is, for example, a false image that we were given in India. We wanted to go next to this murti. Murti means sacred image, right? But you can't approach this murti with a camera, so this image was not possible. But then they have a photo studio, and they do a collage in front of you, and they put this figure, the murti, and you giving some offerings, and they do this, and they said, okay, that's thank you for these images. And they said, be careful, Roger, this is a true images. You have to trust it, right? So it's fake in a way, but it's very trustworthy in another. So it is in this idea of the positionality of the actor in relation to the image that the idea of the misleading nature of images is negotiated. Second important aspect is that we live in times where the notion of visual assessment is taking ground, is getting increasingly important. We distinguish, but I didn't want to talk about it, three main concepts for the project. It is image making. What does it mean to make an image? Image intensification, how images are being circulated, and image assessment, how images, I have a definition. The concept of image assessment refers to the patterns, attitudes, technologies, and values mobilized to evaluate the trustworthiness or deceptive nature of images. It also points to the actions these assessments spark. So the idea of image assessment is very rooted. Even we, individually, we are increasingly familiar with this, right? With this idea of the visual suspicion. Think about yourselves. When you're just looking at the newspaper or just going through internet, what makes you rely on trust and images more than others? What are the aesthetic elements? Can it be, for example, the text that is accompanying the image? Is it the context? Imagine, the photograph of an asteroid about to collapse, to crash against the Earth. If you find it in a sport newspaper, it's not very frightening. If it's shown by a astrophysician, it's getting more dangerous, right? But it's the same image. But the context changed. So the way you evaluate this image in terms of trust and mistrust differs as well, right? So now we are in a new epistemology of image assessment. Actually, we assess everything. We are in a regime of assessment. You go to the toilet, and you have to put if you are happy or unhappy with these faces. You go to drink a coffee, and you have to leave an assessment, a rate. We are rating everything. We are assessing everything. We are in times of assessment. It's a new political epistemology that is affecting images as well. AI creates false images. AI creates the antidote to debunk them, which is creating an aesthetics of assessment. Now I'm preparing a visual piece on this, right? A new epistemology, a new aesthetics made of arrows and circles, and where these circles acquire an almost ontological value, distinguishing between one domain and another domain. So, who does this assessment? Machines assess. The assessment of images is increasingly made through data. So not the image as a visible form, but the image as a code. And this has been also very studied and worked on by artists. Now, for example, there is an interesting field work to be done in the domain of justice, in courts, in Spain. Until very recently, a photograph was considered what is called a conclusive proof. But it's not the case anymore. If you show a photograph, you need another person who does an image assessment. But this image assessment is not made on the basis of the photo as a visible form, what it shows, but on the basis of the code associated to the image, that is, on the metadata. Right? So let's, for example, get the concept of metadata. And let's try to experiment and speculate. What is religious metadata, for example? A kind of stories that are connected to images, right? Metadata is all this information that connects to images, but it's beyond the frame, but that permits to assess the image itself. And then we distinguish different modes of assessment, and with this I will be finishing. What we call formal assessment. I don't trust this image because this is very badly done, which is totally the case. But also contextual assessment. Because I'm in this institution, I trust the image. It can't be false, right? Then there is gnostic or intuitive assessment, which is the way devotees explain how they assess images, as a kind of intuition, as a kind of the darshan in India. You know that notion? It's the blessing through the eyes, kind of direct connection with the divinity through the act of viewing. Genetic assessment, and perhaps the most important one, what we call relational assessment. So this is a conclusion as well. We made a survey in Catalonia among adolescents between 14 and 18 years old, more than 3,000. I prefer qualitative methods, but we did this. And one of the questions was, what is the main criteria for you to trust an image? Response. Overwhelming, if the image has been sent by someone who I trust. This is relational assessment. I trust in this image, I assess the image, not on the basis of what the image depicts, but if it is part of a broader network of trust. Which is fine, because it's fine to love friends, we love our friends, but we can say that it's also very dangerous, especially in informational bubbles and the spreading of false information, right? And then there is another thing, is that trust and truth is not the same. Visual trust is not visual truth. So to trust an image is not the same as to say that an image is true. Usually we say, because we are very influenced by this paradigm of images as copies of the world, that an image is true when it depicts what it shows in a very accurate way, or when we possess all information about how this image has been done. For example, a scientist will say, for me, a true image is an image which has all metadata. That's the definition, right? But what happens with most of the images with whom we interact in our day-to-day life? We don't have this information. So trust, and this is one of the differences between trust and truth, operates usually on a horizon of uncertainty and doubt, and it prompts action. You go to the doctor. The doctor shows you something in your body, say, look at this. This is not looking good. We should start the treatment. If you trust this gesture, this indexical gesture pointing to the image, and that you start this treatment, I mean, it's a matter of trust. It's not a matter of truth. Of course, you consider that the image must be true in some way or another, but you don't have this information. Trust is a future-oriented category. And images do not represent the world. They shape it. They prompt us to do things. And through acts of visual trust, we interact with the world and with others. So we trust an image when we evaluate it as a reliable medium, although we ignore all this partially, what kind of image it is and how it has been made. So for example, this was during this ICE thing in the States, doing some kind of digital ethnography. Is it real? In any case, I like it, right? I mean, the idea is, I don't know if it has been done through artificial intelligence or not, but it's conveying the message that I want to do. I trust this image. Or for example, these images. You know these kind of platforms, right? This is just a gift for an anthropology. This is a treasure because it has to do with magic, right? And we study magics in the world, right? So meet your future self, look younger, add magic to your selfie, great. Then, I mean, do you trust it or not? Is it a true image? I mean, the question doesn't even make sense. It's more a matter of trust than a matter of truth. And for example, let's figure out that you trust this image. And I say, oh, this is going to be me in 20 years, right? How awful. I will change my life, just stop smoking, stop alcohol, healthy life, whatever. And then finally, you look differently than the image, right? So here is a very interesting example of how the image prompts you to do things. That you act against your own image. You see what I mean? That prompts action is the performative power of action, of images, and of course, the performative power of trust. So this is more or less the project Visual Trust. We are working on this, doing all this. The project is approaching the end, and I will show you a couple of films right now if you still want to, but it's not over yet. Now, part of the interest in coming here was to advance in three main directions. One is a final film, which will gather images coming from religion, society, and science, and which will be a broad reflection on the issue of visual trust and visual mistrust. Then there is a book, and there is a potential idea of an exhibition that I would like to do on the matter of visual trust, making some participation for the visitors. And so I think that I will stop my talk here, and I will be happy to answer your question if you have, and perhaps showing you a couple of some minutes of some of the films that we have made. Thank you very much. It's a lot of information, but I just wanted to make like a general portrait of the project and of some of its conclusions. But now we can, if there are questions, have a couple of questions, and then I show the films.
Thank you for the talk, which we appreciated. I appreciate. Since when are you doing that research? 3 years now?
The project started in 2021. And it's a 5 years project. So it should finish next September.
Okay.
But I wrote a letter to the European Commission, and I was begging for a 1 year extension, and I got it.
Yeah.
Which is what allows me to think that perhaps all these final outcomes will be possible.
Yeah, because it's really a very vibrant field and it becomes more and more urgent. So you started timely, but you need an extension, I agree. Let's hope you get even a follow-up project for that, because I think it opens a lot of questions. We know it already from everyday life a lot with the AI-generated images. I just wonder, I also have a question. As an artist, also I'm working with generating artificial images in certain setups. And I personally have a question and have a take on that. You showed the political images like this from the Russian revolution, from the communists. And we know about this time, about the first image photo manipulations a lot, when the Stalin Lenin images were manipulated, and each time, even with photography already, some people who were normal, like Trotsky and others, they were retouched out. And it changed with the political attitude also. So it's very difficult if we analyze these images again by the metadata images. I don't know exactly if a software can do it or if another AI can check the AI images. How is your position on that? Is this a good way? And the second, how do you think about historical images? My personal question was, how does it affect AI, our history? So our memory of images, then our collective memory. This is like a question. Yeah, the software is more question, the other one more speculation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was looking for an image. I don't know if I'm going to find it. No, I don't have it here. Okay, it doesn't matter. In relation to the first question, if I understood it properly, I think that now when we are approaching digital images, and now AI-generated images, but let's go one step back. Digital images were defined as networked images, right? Networked images means that the image is not what is within the frame as a separate and separable object, but is part of a whole network or system, which is a multimodal one, implying texts, implying also sound, music, and also a myriad of versions of the same image. This concept of networked images, that the digital image, and it also applies to the digital image, which is made out of an initial data set, right? Actually has a recursive power because it permits us to look back and to understand what images, and photography in particular, have always been. They have always been networked images. The problem was thinking that an image in a frame hung on a wall was sufficient, and it was not. And it was not because actually it was an artifice to think like this, because next to the image we had a title. I mean, if you look at an image and they say innocent person, I mean, the word innocent changes the relationship of visual trust that you have with the image. That's why some artists prefer to put no title, right? Because the title, of course, influences the way you approach it, but also the institution, but also even the person who's next to you watching at this image. The way you talk to this person is part of the experience of images. So there are no images per se. There are only ways of relating to images. And this relational approach is the specificity of anthropology when it goes to the study of images. And I'm not saying that it's just for anthropologists. I hate academic narrowness that this is for anthropologists, don't come here, right? No, on the contrary, I think that it's an approach, it's a sensitivity that a lot of artists, sociologists, and people from other places share as well. However, it is very anchored with the anthropological tradition. So all images are networked images, all images are images in progress, and all images have to face their own shadows, that is, their own copies. Because there is what we call this visual kinship, the genealogies of images, where images are connected to other images. And the second question with artificial intelligence, I think I don't remember it. But I think, how was it?
It was about you showed this test of the images where the AI system is checking if it's real or not, 99% or not. Is this the way to go? You already answered.
No.
You said no, relational, right? And then it was about the speculation of how it affects our own memory. But this is
yes, that's a very good one. I was, that actually there is these apps that actually animate images. You know them, they animate all images. You put an old image, and they you know these apps, and they animate them and they put it in movement, right? And so they are announced as a way of fulfilling the gaps of our own memories. So mostly even our memories of ourselves are not memories directly, are memories of the images that we have seen, right? So actually this also shows a very important aspect which is connected to my previous response, that all images are images of previous images, and that was the idea of the image that never ends and of the story that never ends, right? That one goes, there's this kind of big networked images. So it affects memory as well, of course. And also, perhaps, if we thought that memory was a kind of archive on the basis of analogic photography, because 20th century is the century of analogic photography, perhaps we will start conceiving our memory more in an AI style, more like a kind of genesis of, let's say, non-original or copy images made out of a previous data set. Because technology is not about only what we do with them. The technologies are artifacts for thinking through them. I mean, they constitute models to think about. You see what I mean? But perhaps the way we conceive our own memory and the act of remembering will be highly influenced by artificial intelligence as well. And one of the difficult things when you do anthropology is that you occupy a very ambiguous space between what we might call their world and your world, right? When you do anthropology of religion, this sometimes is very embarrassing, but also very challenging, epistemologically speaking, right? You are doing fieldwork about in a community where the spirits, and this is, I've made films about that, right? Where people are possessed by the spirits of ancient Indian caciques or leaders who were killed during the Spanish conquest of Venezuela. So they descend into people's bodies and they talk. They explain what happened. It's history in first person, right? And then they say, do you believe that? Or you are just studying, right? What do you say? I mean, sometimes it's not that easy, right? I don't like I don't want to lie. I usually say, oh, I don't believe, but I have respect. But you always have this position, this ambiguous position, this liminal position of anthropology, right? So, for example, with fact-checkers, it happens sometimes as well. The way they fact-check an image, the way they consider that an image is assessed, or the image is true or false, may not be the same as me as researcher of this Visual Trust project. And so sometimes there can be frictions. But these frictions is exactly what anthropology studies, these territories of friction between different ways of understanding. In this case, to understand what a reliable image is.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have a question regarding that image from India, I believe it was, where there are these like sacred statues, and it's forbidden to photograph them, but they do pictures for you of you being, like montage them of you being in it or at that site. And I have two questions about that because I think it's really interesting. So is it like they photographed once the statue and then they montage every visitor into the same photograph?
Well, it's true photograph, but it's false. Well, I have to say first that the person next to me is Juan Francisco Cuyas. He's one of the researchers of this project, and he has been doing an excellent job. We went together in India twice to make a film, on which I have been working last week here. And so the idea here is that here is the place where believers go to get darshan. Darshan is the blessing through the act of looking. Right? In India, in Hinduism, darshan is when you have a direct connection with someone through the act of looking, that you look directly through the eyes, like I'm looking at you, right? But if it's a god or the goddess, this visual contact creates an idea of blessing. It blesses you. It affects you internally, right? So people come here to get darshan from this murti. Murti means sacred image, which means that this image is not an image. It's something more than an image. I mean, and this is the whole ambiguity of religious images, which in a way identify with what they depict, that is, with divinity themselves, right? It is very common that you cannot film religious images when they acquire this sense of person, because it can harm these images, right? So, for example, when I was doing fieldwork in Venezuela, and I have a paper called the Forbidden Shot, there was a shot that I couldn't do, a shot that you can't do, which is a frontal shot of a possessed person or of a sacred image, because the frontality means that there will be a collision of looks, right? So we couldn't come here, we couldn't film here, we couldn't take the image here, but we did exactly this. We did this. We were there, I promise you. And we did an offering, right? So, but there was no visual record. So then, and this is a film, this appears in the film, they have a small studio next to the temple, and they recreate this scene artificially to make, but it happened, so it's true, but it's false. And most interestingly, making, let's say, false images like this one is a kind of offering, is what they call a puja. Puja is a notion which means when they decorate images. You see this image here? They have painted on the painting. You see? They do a visual intervention on the painting. They put flowers. You see that? You see, they put flowers, they paint. So all this is an instance of respect. So altering the image is a way of worshipping, of getting in contact with the sacred. And then it's very interesting because they say what we do in Photoshop when we do these digital altars, when we do false images, is also puja, is also a way of worshipping the gods. And here is the interesting of anthropology, that probably no one would say that altering an image with Photoshop, artificial intelligence, is a way of worshipping, right? But it is one of the uses of these technologies. And here is, for me, the interest of anthropology is that you can learn this when you go to people and you spend time with them and you talk to them and you take nothing for granted. And this is the first step of anthropology. You don't take anything for granted. Because what works for you may not work for others.
Hi, also thanks for the talk. I just have a question, if you could reveal the sculpture or little thing in Puerto Rico you mentioned. I hope I didn't miss it, but what does it actually mean now? Because you said they told you what it looks like is something else than what it means. And so what does it mean?
Well, I will have to come next year, if you allow me. Because I'm going to Puerto Rico in July, and I will try to understand that, finish the film. Because what I see here is a white man killing black people, right? And for me, as a Catalan, I'm not the only one in the room, the image of Santiago Matamoros is a very well-known image in Spain because it is a symbol that has been adopted even by extreme right. I mean, the most conservative part of Spain. It's like a symbol of what is called La Reconquista, so when the Muslims were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, right? So it's a symbol of colonialism. For me, it's a violent image. For me, it is a violent image. And this is a question that I'm also trying to write about. What is a violent image? What makes an image violent, right? And when I say, okay, what do you see here? Because here I see a white male killing black people, Muslims, African people anyway, and you say that it's an image of love. And they say, yes, it is an image of love. And then you can adopt two positions here. You can say, okay, the first one, classic Marxist position, alienation. They do not realize that actually what they are doing is worshipping the enemy. They have adopted the images and the symbols of the enemy. And while they think that they are worshipping them, they are actually, sleeping with the enemy. Is it clear what I... Or the other one, which means perhaps in their way of thinking, the notion of violence is different. Perhaps here what we see is a sort of domestication of authority, as we say in anthropology. That is a way of bringing the authority next to you and re-signifying it, or perhaps a little bit of both. Because they say here, this image shows this war scene, but actually it is an image which symbolizes fighting against obstacles. And obstacles can be the racism that we are suffering. Okay. That's puzzling, right? It is so puzzling that actually there is no even a consensus within the same village. There is a young generation of artists, and this is what I want to film in July, that do not agree with this idea, that say, no, this is bullshit. This is the image of the enemy. This is colonialism. You can say whatever you want, but an image shows what it shows. And here there is a white man killing black people, right? So let's make another image. And actually there is one image circulating where the ethnic ground of these two figures are inversed. So you can imagine who is killing whom, right? And this is what I want to film in July. Well, this is an epistemological challenge to understand this, right? Because perhaps this idea that one thing is what the image shows and another thing is what the image means, in a way is interesting as well, because we know that the meaning of images is not in the image itself, but in the relationship that we create with them, right? And here is the myth. And with this I will finish my answer, which is not a proper answer because I don't have an answer. This is and I'm actually organizing a small show in Barcelona of these artists and all this imagery, right? This is a piece by Samuel Lind, a local artist, the one who was painting, this image that I showed that was painting. And this is called El Encuentro, which means the encounter. And this is the initial myth of this image. So we see the myth of this black slave who went to the sea to fish some crabs, and there this image appeared. It is an autopoietic image. And this is very important, as autopoietic images are self-generated images, images that appear by themselves. And usually religious images are, right? And it gave them an extra trustworthiness, right? And so at this moment, and here you see all the syncretism, he realized that the image told him, I will protect you. And this is the original myth that they are repeating all the time, and which is on the basis of this image, right? And this is the poster, the serigraphy that actually shows this what they call, in a very beautiful expression, a visual myth. But I'm still struggling with it. Because for me, it is an image of colonialism. And it is a violent image. But I have to make the effort to understand why they trust it so much. And also why the younger generation do not trust it.
So, are there still at the moment questions? Otherwise, I would suggest if you still want to show some of the film snippets to continue with that in order to maybe then also have one or two questions at the end related to those.
Yeah, we'll just...
Otherwise, just...
It's already 7.
Okay.
I can just show 5 minutes of each film or 3-4 minutes just for you to have an idea. And let me just say before that there is one thing we wanted to avoid by, when making these films, and it was the idea of a style. I don't like style, the idea of having a style. I don't think that a research project needs to have a style. Because the style, at least in research cinema is not about filming a research. It's about making research through film, which is different, right? So you really, the style comes from the fieldwork. It is not something that you apply on the fieldwork, right? So some films are more experimental, other films are more reflexive, other films are more observational. It depends on the film, it depends on the research. You are not going to make a film about Santiago Matamoros in the same way as you do a film about an astronomical laboratory center for generated images, right? And each researcher has her or his own sensitivities, and also you have to respect that, right? So this is why they are so different, and actually I find it fun. So this is the beginning of a film. There are no English subtitles yet, but they speak in English at the very beginning about astronomical images.
Pollution around here. The atmosphere is stable and we have stable winds and there's no turbulence, so we have very sharp images. We have more than 60 or 70% of the nights there are no clouds, humidity, no rain, and we can do astronomy and images.
What we do is monitor and supervise the correct functioning of the different equipment that we have running here so that the science that the users request can be correctly acquired and processed and given to them in the most efficient way possible.
Okay, so I will stop here. It's very cruel, but as you can see, the idea of this research film on the life of astronomical laboratory was to play with the idea of filters, right? As the astronomical image, we consider them as photographs, but they are not. They are simulation. They are made out of data. What astronomers call the poor image are the images of the beginning. Poor white, black and white images, just some blurry dots on a screen. And from these blurry dots, you have the beautiful images of your galaxies that you trust so much and that are in your screensavers of your computers, right? So as they say, you change the filter, you see another universe. So the idea was to play with the filters, with the idea of manipulating images, the fact that the images are crafted, are made rather than taken, right? So that's what the idea of the whole film made by Alki Merol and myself, right? There is even a moment where the person talks about trust, which I will not find right now, but anyway, it doesn't matter. And there are and it follows the way images are being done, right? Another film which is quite different and that represents the social image, let's put it like that, is a film made by Mihai Andrei Leaha. I will show you the beginning and a little bit in the middle. It is about two artists in Brazil that were fighting against disinformation, right? Spread mostly by Bolsonaro. With Mihai, we just finished the film, but it's not, the color grading is not done, and it looks awful, so I don't want to show it. This one is made, and I think it will be better. So I will show you a little bit of the beginning, and at the end of this work, which is much more observational, and which is called Verdade e Mentiras, that is lies and truths.
E qual é o plano? O plano é dividir verdades na rua. Você sabe que a rua é soberana, né? A verdade da rua ninguém tira.
São temas que a gente está trabalhando.
Força, Cauê! Valeu, obrigado, hein? Até mais tarde.
Essa coisa da fake news, assim, né? realmente é uma fissura de realidade. Você sai na rua, você vê gente morando na rua, você vê a população miserável, você vê a condição das pessoas. E daí o cara fala assim, ah não, mas isso não existe, mas isso... Né? Então, é uma ruptura da base mínima de consenso sobre o que é o mundo, assim, né? Tipo, então, assim, você não está vendo isso, né? Tipo, é aquela coisa bem Big Brother, né? Tipo...
Parece que a única verdade que predomina é o que se vê na janelinha do celular, assim. As pessoas, a gente vai entrar no centro, aqui em São Paulo, numa região que aumentou a população de rua. Hoje estima-se mais de 35 mil pessoas morando na rua na cidade de São Paulo.
So they do public interventions, but the most interesting one is by the end of the film, and I will show another, when they actually invented what they call bazooka poetica, and they actually is a very situationist approach. They project images and sentences that contest the lies spread by extreme right as a public intervention. So I think it's interesting because it shows you the relationship of trust and mistrust. They mistrust some images, but they continue to rely on images in order to counterfight misinformation. And this is a very interesting thing. Acts of mistrust provoke acts of trust in images as well, right?
Não existe amor em SP, labirinto místico, onde os grafites gritam, não dá pra descrever numa linda frase de postal tão doce. Cuidado com doce, São Paulo é buquê. Buquê são flores mortas, num lindo arranjo lindo feito pra você. Não existe amor em SP, os bares estão cheios de almas tão vazias, a ganância vibra, a vaidade excita, devolva minha vida.
We invited this artistic movement in Barcelona, and if you go to the website of the project, you can see that if it's working. And actually, with them, we did a workshop with this bazooka poetica. We made images as well, and we could even screen. And it's going very slowly. It's being renewed. The website of the project. We could even screen the words "visual trust" on the Cathedral of Barcelona, which for me was a pleasure, right? So we also were screening here in the website. We have all the conferences and essays that we have done here. Bazooka workshop conducted by Kawe, and this is part of the public engagement as well. So the people who appear in the film, we try to make them come to Barcelona as well at some point, and so we invented some images like this, and we projected them in the streets of Barcelona, as you see. But these images had to do with the idea of visual trust, right? And so trying to provoke on the passerbys, what do you trust, an image or not another? What makes you distrust an image, right? A truth told with bad intention can beat all the lies you can invent, right? This is one of the sentences. Or even in the Columbus, right? Which is also a matter of mistrust. So this was part of the interest of this of this, intervention. And of course, I have many more films to show, but I don't know if I should perhaps finish here, or you want to see the beginning? Because I showed one film from science, one film from society. I showed the beginning of a film about religion, and then we stop. Is it fine? Okay. So let's go to Puerto Rico again. And with this, I will finish. So this is a very short experiment that actually was, as you will see, is part of a mistake. I wanted to film a person who was blessing religious images. And in Puerto Rico, religious images are blessed through tobacco. You smoke tobacco. I'm not a smoker. Huh? You smoke, and then with the smoke blesses images and turn images into persons, into living beings, right? And it was very dark. And I had a torch, and I did a mistake. And I pushed the color button on the torch. And so blue, green, and yellow lights were started to flicker. And I said, I'm sorry. Well, all this is explained, right? But I like explaining this. And I said, I'm sorry. And he said, this is wonderful. This is how I see images when I'm in trance. Again, how many things we come to know thanks to the mistakes we do on the field, right? As in art.
Antes, cuando he puesto las luces de colores,
sí,
me has dicho que te parecía
interesante.
Interesante. ¿Por qué?
Sí, le da vida a la imagen.
¿Quiere entonces fumarte el tabaco con los colores? ¿Qué te parece?
Como los colores y el tabaco, sí, debe ser interesante.
Vamos a ver.
Sí.
Vamos a hacer ese experimento. ¿Cuál? ¿Este te parece bien?
¿Ah?
¿Este te parece
sí,
bien?
Seguro. Excelente. Mamá. Permiso, dele one. Su permiso en bongo. Yo tengo ahí una preparación. No sé si acepten que la filmen.
Podemos pedir permiso luego.
Sí. Pido que se abran las puertas para Roger Canals, que lo que está haciendo sea fructífero para él para esta casa. Que usted nos dé la bendición, mamá. Si observa, está cambiando su rostro. Con calma te vas a dar cuenta que va cambiando el rostro, ese producto de la espiritualidad que tiene ella.
El rostro de la imagen está cambiando.
Sí. Se pone en evidencia de que detrás de ella hay una tribu. Lo mismo ocurre con el indio ojo de águila.
¿Tú ves cómo el rostro del indio está cambiando?
Vamos a hacer la prueba.
Vamos.
Me bota la ceniza. Observa. Bueno, al indio de la casa, este es un indio vigilante que cuida. Cambia el color de sus ojos.
Well, this is a short experiment. You can watch, it's on the website. You can watch the whole film. We have long feature films. We are finishing them, but then we have short films which are more like experiments or things that happened on the field, as this one. And this one is, I think, very nice because it's a lot about this idea of how we interact with images, right? And what an image means in another cultural context. Because he says the color of his eyes is changing, but he doesn't say the color of his eyes is changing because of the touch. It's changing anyway, because when images become living beings, they move as we move. The torch is just a device that allow us from outside to have an analogy of what it's really going on here, right? But again, it's about the intensification of images. It's about what an image means. It's about visual trust. It's about also our trust of spectators on the images that we are seeing. So I will stop here the showing of these 3 examples of the films. We are currently making new films, and I hope I will have the opportunity to show them to you.